Hey, what's up? In this podcast, we ditch boring political propaganda and smash the fictitious divide between the West versus the East. We do it by exploring real-life stories that are often untold and forgotten. The very stories that shaped our common history, which I like to call a shared history. Now, I will tell you the story of a dangerous man. A man with dangerous ideas. And a man who was hanged because of his dangerous ideas. Sir Henry Vane. His enemies called him Al-Qur'an Vane, referring to the dangerous ideas he was propagating. 200 years later, he was remembered as a great American hero who inspired Thomas Jefferson and founding fathers. At that time, Vane's ideas were not seen as dangerous anymore. Rather, his ideas were cherished as foundational to American values. He was a symbol of the idea of America. Who was this dangerous man? And why was he condemned as Al-Qur'an Vane? Let's go back in time. It's 1635, Massachusetts, a colony. You will see a young man step off a ship, arriving to the rough new world. Barely in his mid-20s, he had left behind the comforts of aristocratic England, where his father enjoyed being the household chancellor to King Charles I. At the dismay of his father, young Vane became a convert to Puritan faith, the very reason that he was dropped out of Oxford. His father did his best to change young Vane's leanings and sent him as an ambassador to Europe. But the young man followed his firm convictions. He joined 1,000 others coming to Americas. Sectarian wars were ripping Europe to pieces. He hoped to find a new society where faith and freedom might coexist. When he arrived in Boston, Vane stayed with John Cotton, New England's revered minister and thinker. Both intellectual men were able to speak several European languages. They were probably having long nights debating whether Plato would have made a good Puritan. During meals and evenings by the fire, they cooked up a little side project. Just your everyday, let's start a college idea. That college? Harvard. Yes, that Harvard. It became a reality soon after Sir Henry Vane was elected as the governor of Massachusetts. But Governor Vane wasn't just founding Ivy Leagues, he was stirring pots and gaining enemies. His defense of Anne Hutchinson, the woman whose religious movement was at odds with the Puritan clergy. Vane defended her right to speak, to question, to believe differently. In doing so, he enraged the colony's conservative ministers, who believed the very fabric of their society was unraveling. But Vane saw something deeper at stake. As governor, he resisted the growing push to silence dissenters. He pushed back against clerical power, arguing that civil leaders should not be mere extensions of the church. His vision was radical for its time. He envisioned a government that protected religious diversity rather than enforced religious conformity. Henry Vane's time in Massachusetts was short. The political winds turned, and by 1637, Vane was voted out of office and soon returned to England. But his legacy endured. He left behind not just echoes of a lost battle, but seeds of a greater freedom. Have you ever heard the name Roger Williams? Yeah, of course you know that name, I know. Williams took up the mantle and later founded Rhode Island as a haven for religious outcasts, with Vane's philosophical support echoing in its founding charter. Williams described Vane as an instrument of God for procuring and confirming the charter. The charter was the first of its kind in American history to guarantee religious freedoms. When Henry Vane returned to England, he plunged back into the battle for liberty. He teamed up with the Republican leader Oliver Cromwell to tear down the monarchy, only to later stand against Cromwell when Cromwell started acting like the king who was recently executed. Classic, we fought the dragon and you became the dragon situation. As the struggle intensified, Vane emerged as a fierce voice of resistance in the Parliament until Cromwell struck back. Authorities dragged Vane into Carisbrooke Castle, the same grim fortress that once caged the doomed King Charles I. There, behind cold stone walls, Vane endured the weight of political betrayal. But captivity could not extinguish his fire. Upon his release, Vane regrouped. He gathered a circle of radical thinkers, forging a brotherhood of religious nonconformists and Republican idealists. From this fiery fellowship, he sparked a wave of revolutionary pamphleteering. Among his most dedicated allies was Henry Stubb, a brilliant Latin and Greek scholar with a sharp pen and a defiant spirit. At a young age, Henry Stubb received patronage of Henry Vane, which paved the way for Stubb's education at Oxford. Now, sharing the same worldview, Stubb was paying back, but supporting Vane in those turbulent times would cost him losing his librarian position at Oxford. Hey, warning, warning, warning. When I talk about Republicans, please do not confuse them with today's Republican Party. Those Republicans were challenging the conservative aristocracy and defending religious freedoms. Something unexpected happened. Cromwell died, and the Royalists quickly grabbed the power to restore the monarchy. In the turbulent year of 1659, Vane found himself caught in the crossfire. A royalist satire castigated him as Al-Qur'an Vane. His friend Stubb penned manuscripts to defend Vane and the ideas of religious freedoms. After Charles II's official coronation in 1660, the new regime started to arrest those who directly involved in the execution of Charles I. Although Vane did not support the regicide, he was also arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. The Parliament petitioned Charles to grant clemency to Vane, and the petition was granted. Despite the clemency, however, Vane was not released and later transferred to the Isles of Scilly. Vane continued to write, defending his views under those extreme circumstances. His new manuscript, The People's Case Stated, was summarizing his belief that power originated with God, but resided primarily with the people.
The power which is directive and states and ascertains the morality of the rule of obedience is in the hand of God. But the original from whence all just power arises is from the will or free gift of the people, who may either keep the power in themselves or give up their subjection and will in the hand of another.
For Vane, the king and people were bound by the fundamental constitution, which if the king violated, the people might return to their original right and freedom. As Vane was writing his manuscript, another royalist satire was depicting him as a radical who was attempting to change the British law with the Islamic law, what they called the laws of Muhammad. Vane was moved back to the Tower of London in 1662, was arraigned on charges of high treason against Charles II. As was typical of those accused of treason, Vane was denied legal representation. Accused of imagining the death of the king in 1659, Vane attempted to defend himself. It was not possible to commit treason against a king who was not crowned yet. Vane's fury was in vain. The jury was quick to convict him after 30 minutes with death penalty. In his final days, Vane, whom King Charles II described too dangerous a man to let live, carefully prepared a speech he intended to make at his execution. Famous diarist Samuel Pepys recorded the execution as the following.
He made a long speech, many times interrupted by the sheriff and others there, and they would have taken his paper out of his hand, but he would not let it go. But they caused all the books of those that writ after him to be given the sheriff. And the trumpets were brought under the scaffold that he might not be heard. Then he prayed, and so fitted himself, and received the blow. But the scaffold was so crowded that we could not see it done. But Bormann, who had been upon the scaffold, came to us and told us that first he began to speak of the irregular proceeding against him, that he was denied to have his exceptions against the indictment allowed, and that there he was stopped by the sheriff. Then he drew out his paper of notes and began to tell them first his life, that he was born a gentleman, that he was bred up and had the quality of a gentleman, and to make him, in the opinion of the world, more a gentleman, he had been, till he was 17 years old, a good fellow. But then it pleased God to lay a foundation of grace in his heart, by which he was persuaded, against his worldly interest, to leave all preferment and go abroad, where he might serve God with more freedom. Then he was called home, and made a member of the Long Parliament, where he never did, to this day, anything against his conscience, but all for the glory of God. Here he would have given them an account of the proceedings of the Long Parliament, but they so often interrupted him, that at last he was forced to give over. And in all things appeared the most resolved man that ever died in that manner, and showed more of heat than cowardice, but yet with all humility and gravity.
Sir Henry Vane would be remembered 200 years later in the United States. A statue to honor Vane was erected in the Boston Public Library. Famous American writer Ralph Waldo Emerson placed Vane on a list of historical greats. Wendell Phillips, who was a prominent American abolitionist and friend of Frederick Douglass, described him with a vivid portrait.
Sir Henry Vane, in my judgment, the noblest human being who ever walked the streets of yonder city. I do not forget Franklin or Sam Adams, Washington or Fayette, Garrison or John Brown, but Henry Vane dwells an arrow's flight above them all, and his touch consecrated the continent to measureless toleration of opinion and entire equality of rights. We are told we can find in Plato all the intellectual life of Europe for 2,000 years, so you can find in Henry Vane the pure gold of 250 years of American civilization, with no particle of its dross. Plato would have welcomed him to the academy, and Fenelon kneeled with him at the altar. For other men we walk backward, and throw over their memories the mantle of charity and excuse, saying reverently, "Remember the temptation and the age." But Vane's ermine has no stain, no act of his needs explanation or apology, and in thought he stands abreast of our age, like pure intellect, belongs to all time.
But why were Vane's ideas associated with Islam? What was the reason? Was it merely a slur hurled by his enemies? Or did it reveal something deeper about the man himself? Was it because of his bold defense of religious liberty for all? Or was it tied to his friendship with Henry Stubb, the English scholar who dared to praise Islam as a pure and rational faith? Did Vane, too, read the first English translation of the Qur'an? Or was the name a warning from his contemporaries, an accusation that his theology had drifted dangerously close to what they called Mahometan ideas? We don't know the exact answer, but perhaps the truth lies buried in the chatter of London's coffee houses, those early laboratories of free thought, where Vane's radical ideas mingled with merchants, dissenters, and travelers fresh from the Ottoman world. If you were to visit a coffee house back then, a strange entrance would welcome you. You would see oriental signs above the entrance carrying the sign of a Turk's head, most likely the face of Ottoman Sultan Murad IV, along with the words,
"Murat, ye great men, did me call,"
while on the reverse was a crescent with a statement,
"Where'er I came, I conquered all."
So, coffee drinking was perceived as an act of apostasy. It was associated with being culturally fickle, which was the first step in renouncing Christianity. Coffee drinking became so fashionable that within a decade after the first coffee house opening in London in 1652, coffee emerged as a rival to traditional ale. Oxford professor Edward Pocock translated Arabic texts to propagate the health benefits and semi-miraculous effects of coffee consumption. A fear brewed within the aristocracy due to Muslim culture's appeal to English commoners. Calling coffee as Muhammadan berry, the supporters of monarchy warned the public against the power of Turkish spell. If coffee had magic power of medical use, it might also have mysterious effects to seduce Christians from their religion. English theaters dramatized those who turned Turk and who became diabolical villains, only to be punished by violent death. Some blamed lax policies and religious toleration after the Republican Revolution by Oliver Cromwell as the cause of this harm. So, Henry Vane's defense for religious freedoms were seen as a threat, and perhaps Vane was an enemy within. After all, Vane's ideas of religious toleration looked like a yearning for Ottoman Muslim culture. He may be one of those dangerous Turkophiles mushrooming in England. For the anonymous manuscript, the character of a coffee house, nothing was a coincidence. There should be an association between the Republican rebellion that executed the King Charles I, the first English translation of Quran, and opening coffee houses in London. The author put it up front poetically. When coffee once was vended here, the Al-Qur'an shortly did appear. That first Quran translation to English in 1649, however, was not conducted by a Republican. The translator, Thomas Ross, did not know Arabic. Rather, it was a translation of the recent French translation of 1647. The Cromwell's new regime immediately arrested the printer of the translation and confiscated the printed copies. Thomas Ross wrote a preface in his Quran translation in which he justified his action. Ironically, Ross justified his translation of the Quran by attacking the Quran. There is no reason to fear from Quran, as he claimed that the contents are not worthy to be believed in. Ross made a sinister attack on the Cromwell's Republican regime without mentioning them. He said he knew why the Republican authorities were fearful. It was because they were not strong enough in their Christian faith, Ross wrote. If they were strong, they would not be fearful of the Quran. So Ross engaged in a polemical attack to Islam in order to target the regime that questioned Ross's intention in translating Islam's holy book. He criticized Prophet Muhammad's giving freedom to slaves. His depiction of the Prophet as a rabble-rouser revolutionary was a hint. Republican revolutionaries invoked religious reformation with greater tolerance and gave freedoms to lay people. Of Islam's prophet, Ross wrote,
"Under pretense of reformation of religion, he had gained many followers. Now he resolved to yoke to it that other concomitant in popular disturbances, liberty, proclaiming it to be the will of God."
In Ross's portrait of Muhammad, the reader could easily read the lines to see the picture of Cromwell. According to Professor John Tolan, who narrated this anecdote in his book, Faces of Muhammad, Thomas Ross could not attack Cromwell's regime directly, for his troubles would be much greater than those he already had with the Council of State. Indeed, Ross was arrested in 1654 on suspicion of treason in an affair that has nothing to do with the Quran translation, and subsequently released on bail. He later went to Cologne to join King Charles II in exile. For royalists attacked Islam to target their opponents, some Republicans reacted in kind to prove their loyalty to English nation. John Milton, for example, associated Islam and king's tyranny by using a character of Turkish Oriental despot. The polemics never ended until a secret book that came to be circulated among the intellectuals. Its author was none other than Sir Henry Vane's close friend Henry Stubb. Thanks to Vane, Stubb was graduated from Oxford. After the execution of Vane, Stubb was fearful of the regime's retribution. But he was on something secretly. It was the first scientific study of Islam in England, and this unpublished, secretly circulated book would have a tremendous impact on English Enlightenment and later on the Republican revolutions in France and America. That's in the next episode.